Welcome. Turn the lights off. No, don't turn them back on. I don't care if you're scared of the dark. The dark is the only thing keeping the visual static from frying your retinas. You're listening to the Phantom Navigator. I am your captain, your warden, and maybe your worst mistake. Tonight, we are talking about Enochian magic. Picture the smartest man in Elizabethan England, court astrologer to the Queen, owns the biggest private library in the country, talks navigation routes with the men sailing off the edge of the known world, advises on the calendar itself. This man is a certified genius. And in the year 1582, this certified genius meets a con artist with cropped ears, because that's what England did to convicted fraudsters back then. They clipped you like a show dog so everyone in the street knew exactly what you were. And this genius says, you know what? Forget geometry, forget astronomy. I'm going to let this guy stare into a black rock and tell me what angels are saying. Spoiler, the angels wanted him to swap wives. Again, I am the Phantom Navigator, and tonight we're getting into Enochian magic. The most insanely precise, mathematically deranged system of ceremonial magic in Western history. In the story of how one lonely genius's hunger to talk to God got him fleeced, humiliated, and immortalized. In that exact order, we've got obsidian mirrors, backwards angel speak, a 400-year-old language nobody can prove is real and nobody can prove is false, and a scandal that would get you canceled today and in 1587. Let's get into it. Now, if you ask a standard suburban modern occultist with a moon-shaped tattoo and a lingering sense of unearthed superiority about Enochian magic, they'll tell you it's a system of ceremonial angel magic. They are lying to you, or they're stupid, or possibly could be both. Enochian magic isn't a system. It's a 16th century cosmic modem. It's plugging a fork into the electrical socket of the high heavens and hoping you get a divine illumination before your nervous system cooks into a pleasant medium rare. Let's go back to 1582. Meet John Dee, Queen Elizabeth's first personal mathematician, astronomer, astrologer, and all-around super nerd, smart guy, brilliant guy. But John had a problem. His math couldn't talk to God, and John desperately, obsessively wanted to talk to God. So, what does a brilliant Renaissance scientist do when he hits a wall? He hires a shady, convicted criminal who claims he can see angels in a shiny piece of rock. Enter Edward Kelly. Edward Kelly was a scryer. He had his ears cropped off by the state for forgery, which, personally, is a stellar resume builder. And he claimed that if he stared deep enough into a black obsidian mirror, the celestial host would come down and sing him sweet little secrets. And Dee fell for it. Hook, line, and sinker. They sat together in moldy, candlelit rooms for years, staring into polished volcanic glass, taking notes. And what did the angels give them? An entire language, Enochian, complete with its own alphabet, grammar, and syntax. The angels claimed this was the tongue God used to speak to universe into existence. The language of creation. If you understand what that means, if you speak Enochian, you aren't just reciting a poem. You are typing root commands into source code of reality. You are opening a command prompt in the universe and hitting delete system 32. Now, if an angel descends into your living room and starts dictating a divine programming language, what does that sound like? Is it a choir or soft? Feathered beings playing harps? No. In actual biblical and Enochian lore, angels aren't blonde ladies with glowing halos. They are terrifying, multi-dimensional, geometric nightmares made of burning wheels, thousands of weeping eyes, and roaring divine fury. They do not care about your feelings. They do not care about your rent payment. They will gladly melt your frontal lobe just to prove a point about geometry. Kelly would sit there, staring into the crystal, sweating through his tunic, screaming that the angels were threatening him, tormenting him, forcing him to translate backwards, literally dictating text in reverse so the raw, chaotic power of the words wouldn't accidentally trigger the apocalypse right then and there. Imagine that job. Excuse me, Archangel Uriel. Could you slow down? My quill is running dry, and also my ears are bleeding. And it gets better. It gets so much worse, folks. As the years went on, Dee and Kelly's angel sessions grew darker, stranger, more erratic. The angels started demanding bizarre rituals, complex tables of letters, calls, keys, 49 heavy gates of spiritual madness. And then came the grand finale. In 1587, Kelly turns to John Dee and says, "Hey, John, the angels just told me something real important. They said, we need to share everything. Absolutely everything." Dee says, "What do you mean, Edward?" Kelly goes, "They mean we have to swap wives, John. The angels commanded a wife swap. God's holy messengers, lords of the highest ethereal dimensions, ordered a Renaissance swingers party." Did they do it? Yes, they did. Did it ruin their friendship and destroy their lives? Absolutely. Because that is what Enochian magic does. It promises you the keys to the kingdom, and by the time you turn the lock, you're standing naked in the rain, wondering where your soul went. Fast forward 300 years. Aleister Crowley, the granddaddy of modern edge lords, decided he's going to go into the Algerian desert and systematically unlock the Enochian ethers or spiritual realms. He goes down the list, level 1, level 2, level 3, opening doors in his own mind that were never meant to have handles. And by the time he reached the 10th Eister, he encountered an entity named Coronozon, the demon of dispersion, the inhabitant of the abyss, and Crowley barely made it out with his sanity intact, which, if you know anything about Crowley, is saying a lot. Considering the fact that he was already 90% off his rocker. People ask me all the time, "Captain, should I practice Enochian magic?" I bought a poster of the watchtowers at a crystal shop. Listen to me very carefully. Do you know how to rewire a high voltage power grid while standing in a bathtub full of salt water? No? Then do not summon the angels of the watchtowers. Enochian magic is not for self-help. It's not for bringing back your ex or getting a promotion at the warehouse. It is a terrifying, sublime, soul crushing engine of divine chaos. The angels aren't your friends, they are cosmic mechanics, and you are a slight bump in the highway. If you start calling out those calls, if you start chanting the 19 keys in your bedroom at 3 in the morning, something will answer, but it won't be a gentle light. It'll be a blinding, deafening siren of pure, unfiltered reality smashing through your ceiling. So keep reading your horoscope, stick to your lavender oils and your rose quartz. Leave the language of the angels in the dark, where Dee and Kelly left it. Unless, of course, you really want to see what's behind the mirror. I know I do. Let's talk more about Dr. John Dee, because before he's the punchline of this story, he is generally one of the most accomplished men alive in his era. Mathematician, cartographer, astrologer to Queen Elizabeth I, meaning he's the guy who literally picked the date of her coronation using astrology, and she trusted him enough to let him. He owns a library so massive it makes Oxford jealous. Thousands of volumes, at a time when owning 50 books made you a scholar. He corresponds with the great mind of the age. He is functionally the Elizabethan equivalent of the guy who's a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, and somehow also owns a boat. But here's the wound. Here's the thing eating him alive, eating him from the inside, quietly, underneath all those credentials. Dee doesn't want to just study the universe. Studying is what you do when you accept the limits of being human. Dee wants to skip the syllabus entirely. He wants direct contact, a hotline to the angelic intelligences he believes actually govern creation, moving the gears behind the world the rest of us just live in. He's convinced that somewhere out there is the original language of Eden, the language Adam spoke before there was ever a need for a translation. The language that got shattered into every broken, inferior human tongue we've been mumbling ever since the Tower of Babel came down. Dee doesn't want to learn a language the way a scholar learns Greek or Hebrew. He wants to recover the language, the one before the fall, the one where words don't just describe reality, they command it, where naming a thing correctly means having power over it. That's not curiosity. That's a man trying to fix something broken in himself by fixing something he believes is broken in the universe. A man who has climbed to the absolute top of what human knowledge can offer him and found out that the summit isn't enough. He needs a thing past the summit. Keep that in your pocket. It's going to get very sad, very specific, and very personal before this episode is over. There's one problem standing between Dee and his angelic hotline. He cannot scry. He tried. He doesn't have the gift, whatever that means, and he knows it. He needs a medium, a vessel, someone else's eyes to stare into the glass so he can just sit there with a pen and write down whatever comes through. Enter the worst decision of his life, wearing a skull cap he never takes off. Edward Kelly shows up in Dee's life in 1582 with cropped ears hidden under that skull cap. A documented history of fraud and counterfeiting that would have gotten him hanged in a rougher country. And an absolutely elite, undeniable talent for staring into a rock and describing things with total conviction. Dee hires him on the spot. No trial period, no second opinion. A genius who had spent decades demanding rigorous, precise mathematical proof for everything else in his life takes one look at a fraudster's confident description of a vision and thinks, "This is the guy." I need you to picture how this actually looked, day after day, for years, every single session. Sometimes for hours at a stretch, Dee sits at a wax-covered table with a note open, pen in hand, and Kelly stares into a polished obsidian mirror. A genuine Aztec ritual artifact, by the way. We are absolutely coming back to that, and starts narrating a vision unfolding in front of him. Angels appear. They dictate letters, not words, not sentences, individual letters, one at a time, painstakingly slow. And they dictate them backwards on purpose because, and this is the part that should have set off every alarm bell in the building, the angels claim that if the message were given forwards in its true and correct sequence, it would release actual destructive spiritual power into the room, too dangerous to transmit the easy way. Has to come through scrambled, then gets reconstructed later by hand, by candlelight. Sit with that mechanism for a second. Every single natural checkpoint where you'd verify this in real time, read it forward, hear it in order, catch an inconsistency as it happens, gets explained away in advance as too dangerous to attempt. That is not a safety feature of divine transmission. That is the oldest structural trick in the con artist playbook. Make the moment of verification the one thing you're not allowed to do, and people quietly stop expecting it. And yet, this is what makes this story genuinely insane instead of just sad. What comes out of these sessions is not gibberish. It is not spooky nonsense syllables strung together for atmosphere. It is a complete, structurally consistent, constructed language, 21 letters, its own syntax, its own internal grammar that holds up under scrutiny session after session, year after year. Linguists who've gone back through the surviving manuscripts note that the sentence structure echoes Elizabethan English in places. Which, fine, that's what you'd expect from two Elizabethan men producing it. But the vocabulary itself is genuinely unique. Not borrowed Latin, not garbled Hebrew, not word salad dressing up in a trench coat. Whatever Kelly was doing, faking it consistently or swept up in something he believes completely, he was doing it with the discipline of an actual linguist constructing a functioning conlang in real time, live, under observation, without ever breaking internal consistency. That's not a small trick. People with linguistics degrees and years of dedicated planning struggle to build a convincing, constructed, language today with interference, with reference, books and notes, taking software. Kelly was allegedly doing it off the cuff, staring into a rock, dictating backwards for an audience of one obsessed, brilliant, increasingly dependent old man footing every single bill. That's either angels or it's one of the most extraordinary acts of sustained creative genius in the history of Western esotericism, performed by a convicted fraudster who needs his patron to never, ever stop believing in him. Here's where it gets dangerously unhinged, because D doesn't just sit there taking dictation like a stenographer. He builds hardware. He engineers a machine for talking to God. He constructs a holy table, its surface inlaid with wax Enochian grids, purpose-built as the operational altar for these sessions. On top of it sits the crown piece, a sigillum diamuth, a massive wax disc nearly 2 feet across, covered edge to edge in pentagrams, divine names, layered geometric structures, functioning basically as an energetic grounding plate for the entire operation. 4 smaller versions of that same seal go underneath each individual leg of the table, physically and spiritually isolating the whole apparatus from the rest of the room, the rest of the house, the rest of the ordinary reality. It's not decoration, it's shielding. D is building something close to a Faraday cage for interdimensional contamination out of wax and geometry, because he genuinely believes what comes through that glass is powerful enough to need containing. And at the center of it all, the shoe stone itself, the obsidian mirror Kelly stares into to receive the visions. This object is later identified, and this detail alone deserves its own episode someday, as originating from Aztec ritual practice, meaning the ultimate device for accessing pre-Babel angelic Eden speak may have started its existence a full ocean away, inside a completely different cosmology built for a completely different set of gods entirely. Nobody in that candlelit room in England knew that, or maybe somebody did and just didn't care. Because when you're desperate enough for a contact, a mirror is a mirror. This is not a guy lighting candles and hoping for a feeling. This is systems engineering applied directly to the divine. Precision instruments, redundant shielding, a controlled operator, a dedicated recorder, and it produces the 2 crown jewels of the entire Enochian system. The green table, the great table, a grid, 13 columns by 12 rows, split into 4 elemental quadrants: fire, air, water, earth. All 4 bound together by a central column representing spirit, running through the middle like a spine. Pull letters out of this grid in the correct combinations and sequences, and you don't get random names. You get the true names of ruling angels, elemental kings, entire structure, hierarchies of being, encoded like a cosmic spreadsheet nobody was supposed to be able to open. In the 30 ethers, concentric spiritual spheres wrapped around the terrestrial plane like the layers of an onion, with the 30th either sitting closest to the earth like the most accessible, the shallow end of the pool, and the first either called Lil, representing the outer edge of transcendent divine reality itself, the deep end nobody really supposed to survive touching. To move between them, you don't cast a spell in the way people picture spellcasting. You recite one of 19 Enochian poems called the Calls, each one functioning less like a prayer and more like an access key. A specific sequence that cycles the operator deeper and deeper into realms that ceremonial magicians today, 400 years later, still consider genuinely too volatile to run without extreme care. This is not vibes-based magic. This is a lonely, brilliant man trying to build a mathematically precise, structurally redundant staircase to God, one wax seal, one grid, one backwards dictated letter at a time. Okay, this is a part of the story where the human wound finally rips wide open and it is unhinged. By 1587, 5 years into this partnership, 5 years of bankrolling Kelly, defending him to skeptical patrons, staking his own reputation on the authenticity of every session, Kelly reports a new angelic instruction, supposedly delivered through an entity called Mademi. The angels, Kelly says, are commanding that the two men share everything between them, including their wives. D, the genius, the Queen's astrologer, the man who talked cartography and celestial navigation with the actual explorers redrawing the map of the world, writes in his own private journal that he is horrified, disturbed, deeply, viscerally reluctant. And he goes through with it anyways. Sit with why? Because at this point, after 5 years of building his entire spiritual identity, his intellectual legacy, his sense of being chosen around the authenticity of these angelic transmissions, he cannot afford to be the man who finally says no. What would refusing mean? It would mean admitting to himself, the quiet of his own house, that the last 5 years of his life, the wax seals, the isolated table, the backwards letters, the entire architecture he built to talk to God, might have been nothing. A delusion, a very expensive, very public nothing, built on the word of a man with clipped ears and a criminal record. So, he doesn't refuse. He goes through with it. And not long after, the partnership with Kelly collapses for good. The two men parting in the kind of bitterness that only comes after this much shared history and this much shared damage. This is the wound, finally out in the open, no longer a metaphor, a brilliant man so hungry to prove that the divine was speaking directly and specifically to him, that he, out of everyone, had been chosen to recover Eden's lost language, that he let a convicted fraudster rearrange his own marriage on the word of a rock. Whether Kelly was cold, calculating, manipulator running the longest con in esoteric history, or a true believer swept up in the vision he half created and half genuinely experienced? The effect on D was identical either way. Total surrender of judgment to a man who needed him broke, dependent, and structurally unable to walk away. That's not a footnote in occult history. That's one of the oldest human stories there is, just wearing angel wings. Dee dies in poverty in 1608, genuinely materially poor. The Queen's astrologer, the man who once owned the largest private library in England, sells off his books one at a time just to eat and dies largely forgotten, his angel language filed away by history as the sad footnote of a great mind that wandered off the map at the end. And then it doesn't stay buried. Almost 300 years later, in the late 19th century, occultist Samuel Little McGregor Mathers digs the entire system back up out of these surviving manuscripts and folds it directly into the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And just like that, Enochian stops being one dead man's obsession and becomes ceremonial magic's most advanced operating system. The thing seriously practitioners graduate into once the beginner material stops being enough. Then Aleister Crowley gets his hands on it, and Crowley, because of course it's Crowley, decides the correct, reasonable way to test a centuries-old system that even other occultists consider dangerously unforgiving is to walk into the Algerian desert in 1909 and scry all 30 aethers back to back, solo, no safety net, no second scryer to check his work, nothing but a sand and silence, and whatever answers back. Modern ceremonial magicians still talk about that expedition in the way engineers talk about a controlled demolition that went exactly as planned and still left everyone a little rattled. Because Enochian carries a reputation, even now, as one of the few systems in Western esotericism still considered generally a high risk, not beginner friendly, not forgiving of sloppy execution, a system that demands the same obsessive precision from a solo practitioner in the desert that it once demanded from two increasingly codependent men hunched over a wax table in Elizabethan England. A language built out of one man's loneliness and one man's grift, or one man's genuine gift, take your pick, outlived them both, got exhumed, weaponized by an entire secret order, tested to its absolute limits by the most notorious magician who ever lived, and is still being cited today in living practitioner communities as a gold standard of do not attempt this casually. Here's a question that never fully goes away, no matter how many times historians pick this story apart. Let's actually give the mundane explanation its due, because it's a strong one. Kelly arrives with a documented history of fraud. He has every financial motive to keep his one wealthy patron dependent and paying. He controls the only channel of information. Dee never once looks into that mirror himself. He just transcribes what Kelly tells him he's seen. In the one rule that governs the entire system, dictation must run backwards or the power gets released. Happens to be the exact rule that makes real-time verification impossible. That's not proof of fraud, but it is, structurally, exactly what fraud would look like if it were built by someone smart enough to plan for scrutiny. If Kelly was purely, cynically faking it, a career fraudster running the single longest, most elaborate con of his life, then he built, off the cuff, under live observation, a complete and internally consistent language with its own grammar and phonology, sustained flawlessly across years of sessions for an audience of exactly one man he needed to keep believing. That's not a small grift. That's a staggering, borderline, impossible creative feat, executed under pressure, with zero room for error, because Dee was meticulous enough to have caught real inconsistency. If Kelly genuinely believed what he was seeing, if something really was coming through that obsidian glass, whatever you want to call it, then Dee wasn't a fool for trusting him. He was a rational man responding rationally to evidence that, from the inside of that candlelit room, must have felt completely undeniable. Either explanation is uncomfortable. That's exactly why this story has survived 400 years instead of fading into a curiosity footnote like 1,000 other Elizabethan oddities. So what actually happened in that room, with the wax table and the obsidian mirror and the backwards dictated letters? Maybe Edward Kelly really did see something. Maybe genuine intelligences, angelic or otherwise, spoke through a scryer with clipped ears, because that's who happened to be sitting in the chair. Or maybe the real story here is a simpler and sadder, and a lot more human. A brilliant, lonely man wanted so badly to be chosen by God that he let a professional liar build him an entire private religion, one backwards letter at a time, right up to handling over his own marriage on the strength of it. Either way, the language survived both of them. 21 letters, 19 keys, 30 aethers, still spoken, still studied, still treated with genuine caution by people who take this stuff seriously. A system that was either humanity's greatest act of channeled revelation or its most elaborate, most patient act of psychological manipulation. 400 years later, nobody's fully closed the case. I'm the Phantom Navigator. Don't go building any holy tables in your apartment. And if anyone ever tells you the angels want to borrow your girlfriend, that's not Enochian. That's just a red flag with better branding. I'll see you at the next one.